I chose to watch the movie Dead Poet Society, and we're supposed to kind of talk a little bit about teacher presence and what they did to establish their classroom environment in the movie. So I took notes as I watched it. Three effective and positive qualities that the teacher, Professor Keating, decided to do with his class. Something that the film kind of starts off with is it shows little snippets of the kids as they go out throughout their day, and it's always the same thing, really boring, really repetitive. The teacher is lecturing the entire time and they just follow along their textbooks. And then when the students actually walk into Mr. Keating's classroom, it shows he just totally turns all of the expectations upside down. So they walk in and he doesn't have them immediately open their textbooks. He starts whistling and then just leaves the room and tells them to follow him. So they're intrigued, like, why is he doing things this differently? And then they follow him through the hallway and they go up and they look at the pictures of all of the men who have previously gone to the school, and he has them read the first stanza of a poem, and he talks about the implications of the poem as they're looking at all the people who have come before them, and he tells them to seize the day, and that's what the pictures are trying to say, and that makes an impact on the students. It kind of takes them out of their normal routine, and it establishes the fact that he is going to be different from their other classes, and it gains their attention, really. Another thing that he does is he immediately starts by learning their names. And I don't know if the other teachers just didn't do that because they've known the students as they've come through the school, or what, really. But the first thing that he does is he starts learning their names as he's taking roll, and he kind of jokes around with them and makes fun of some of their names, but not in a mean way, just in a way of kind of establishing that relationship with them. He tells them about himself, about, okay, where he was before this and where he is now. He tells them that he went to their school too, and kind of just makes himself look like a person instead of just a professor who's talking to them for no reason. He lets them into his life a little bit, and he shares about his experiences, which makes him more personable for the students. It makes them feel more comfortable, and it makes them want to try harder in his class as well. He establishing that rapport right off the bat, it helps students engage with his content area. You don't ever hear them whining about their English homework. It might be difficult. They're always reading poems, they're always doing English things, but you don't ever hear them saying, oh man, like, we just have to get through it. One of the other effective qualities that I noticed Professor Keating did, he really, without coming out and just stating the expectations and goals he has for the class, he makes them, he does state them, and he establishes a culture of learning, not necessarily just for the sake of getting through his class or getting through the academy, but for the purpose of learning. And the scene that kind of sticks out with this positive thing was whenever they read the introduction to poetry, and he has them rip it off, and he tells them that he's not going to send out a whole group of students who are plotting the importance of poetry on graphs, and he teaches them like the real meaning of poetry instead of just teaching them verbatim, like for formulaic way. He teaches them how to think for themselves, and he makes his content area one that's important to them. He gives it a relevance for them. He doesn't say, okay, we're learning this so that you can be a better college student. He says, we're learning this poetry because that's what we as humans do. This is how we express ourselves. And so I thought that was really important because he makes it for them. He makes it something interesting, exciting, and something that he thinks that they should know how to do as human beings, not just as students. And he also really encourages them to think for themselves, and he teaches them the importance of doing that rather than just saying, we're doing this for our 9-week grade or we're doing this for our semester grade. That being said, there were a few things that I saw that were problematic in his classroom management. There's one scene where he calls out a student in front of everyone else for being afraid to read. And I do think that sometimes students need to be pushed outside of their comfort zone to do things that they wouldn't normally like to do, because I think that does make you a better student. But I do think there are some cases where you don't need to be called out in front of everyone, or you don't need to draw extra attention to the fact that a student struggles reading out loud, just because you don't always know their background and their history. And I think that sometimes when teachers call out other students like that in front of everyone and they're not comfortable, that kind of encourages that sort of behavior amongst their peers. And you can kind of see, I mean, it's a school full of boys, so I feel like there's going to be teasing going on anyway, but you could kind of see the teasing increase after he does that. Another thing that he did is which I think is really good, that he encourages students to freely think and think for themselves, but he doesn't necessarily guide them in that process, or give them any direction about what that looks like whenever your free thinking doesn't line up with authority. And so he doesn't really give them any advice on boundaries until after a student already gets in trouble. So the specific instance I'm thinking of here is when they're in the assembly, because one of them had written an article about how there should be girls at their school, and then the boy gets a phone call from God in the middle of the assembly when they're trying to have a serious discussion about something, and Professor Keating doesn't go back and say, okay, there's a respectful way to be a free thinking, and you can rebel against these ideas, but you need to do it in a respectful way. He doesn't really go and backtrack with the student until after they're already in trouble. I really struggled with this last one because of finding maybe something he didn't do well, because I think like the circumstance in the movie is really horrible, and that I don't think anyone has control over the types of situations where students are contemplating suicide or following through with suicide. But I do think that maybe he didn't have clear expectations for behavior, and perhaps didn't teach students to freely think through the issues they were facing, that he gave them a very idealistic view of life and encouraged them to have that. And I think that's good, because I think you need to have idealism as a youth, otherwise you won't make it through life. You have to have hopeful expectations. But I think that he didn't necessarily equip them to think through when those hopeful expectations aren't met, when you don't get to do the thing that you have been wishing for your whole life, or when there are real obstacles in your way. And I think that's something that he could have worked through in his classroom management maybe, and he could have taught them how to respectfully disagree with the people around them instead of having these just two polar opposite ideas. I really love this movie. I think it does a really good job of demonstrating the conflict between trying to teach to standards and then giving students the ability to read and write and learn for the joy that comes with learning purely, instead of just teaching to a specific standard. So that was my movie analysis.